illustrations and images relating to the Ripper. And of course, the Hughes brothers came here and looked through all this material. And we have the images that were taken at the time of the bodies. This is Polly Nichols in her coffin. And
Whitechapel victim number 1, Mary Ann Nichols.
She was in her 40s. She was very down at heel, much the worse for drink most of the time because, well, as with all the victims, that was the only solace they could find in life, gin, and the comfort that drunkenness brought. She wasn't too badly dressed because she'd not that much earlier been given clothing by the Lambeth workhouse. She'd led a very poor life and a very distressing life. She'd had a very bad time with her husband and she had children, and she'd come from the Lambeth area and come to the East End and settled into prostitution. On the night of August the 31st, she was with a friend called Emily Holland, whom she last saw she was with her in Whitechapel at about 1 o'clock in the morning. She said goodbye to her. She was going off to find a client. And she said, "Look what a pretty bonnet I've got," or some such words as that. She walked off towards Whitechapel station. A few hours later, she was discovered in a doorway in Bucks Row, on the pavement, ritually laid out.
Stephen, the words "ritually laid out," they become more and more important as the story unfolds, correct?
Right, yes.
Let's look at the victims. We just talked of Mary Nichols. Let's talk of her frightening injuries. It wasn't just a sweet killing. I mean, this woman was the first of 5 to be totally slaughtered. If we could look at a word, that would be it, wouldn't it?
Yes, I mean, that's totally slaughtered in the sense that we're talking, in the context of the Ripper killing, suggests she was totally cut to pieces, which wasn't true. She was laid out and her intestines were sort of cut out, and there was general mutilation in the genital area. Her throat was cut from left to right. More detail than that we don't know because the newspapers didn't go into any more detail and the police and medical reports haven't survived. But it certainly was a very horrifying murder, but not nearly as horrifying as those which were to follow.
P.C. Neal on the 31st of August 1888. And then you had the Illustrated Police News that had these rather graphic sort of drawings, sensational drawings on the cover. So again, these were quite interesting because they're contemporary images from 1888.
According to the official record, there were 3 suspects: Montague Druitt, Kosminski, and Michael Ostrog. We know a great deal about the first of these suspects, Montague Druitt. We know his family background. We know that he was a teacher, he was a lawyer. He committed suicide soon after the Mary Kelly killing. He drowned himself in the River Thames. His own family believed him to have been Jack the Ripper. Why they believed him to have been Jack the Ripper, we don't know. The documentation, if it ever existed, disappeared. Number 2 on the police list was Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish Jew, a homicidal maniac who believed he was controlled by forces from outer space. These forces told him that he mustn't eat the food that he was given by friends and relations. He had to eat the food that he found on the streets. So he would often be seen on his hands and knees crawling along these streets, eating what he could find from the gutters. The big problem about Kosminski being Jack the Ripper is that the man was totally insane. If he was the Ripper, somehow you've got to explain why it was that he was allowed to stay free on the streets for another 3 years after the Mary Kelly killing, and during that time committed no further murders or acts of violence. These are big objections to overcome. Number 3 on the police list was Michael Ostrog, a petty crook, continually in and out of prison. He may actually have been locked up in prison in France at the time of the murders. So why he was a suspect, we don't really know. Those are the 3 official suspects. The central house is number 29 Hanbury Street, and it was a yard at the back of this house, which is where...
At 6:10 in the morning of September 8th, 1888, Inspector Joseph Chandler, on duty at the Commercial Street Police Station, was informed there had been another Whitechapel murder. This time, once again, a prostitute in her mid-40s, Anne Siffy, otherwise known as Annie Chapman.
She again was laid out. At her feet were laid out several trinkets. There were 2 rings, 2 brass rings, laid side by side, and 2 mint-condition brass farthings, laid edge to edge. And she was even more mutilated, far more appalling injuries than Mary Nichols. Her entrails were completely cut out of her, and her intestines were thrown over her shoulder. Her throat was cut so deeply that her head was almost severed from her body.
She'd been seen talking outside this house with a man described as wearing a deerstalker hat, something like Sherlock Holmes. The man was heard to ask, "Will you?" and Annie Chapman replied, "Yes." But nobody saw them go through the passage at the side of the house into the yard at the back. Some 30 minutes later, one of the lodgers came down to the yard, opened the back door, and found the body of Annie Chapman. The body was lying parallel to the fence, the head towards the house. Chapman's hands were up above her head as though she'd been fighting. The throat had been cut back from the spine. She'd been ripped open from the vagina to the breastbone. The insides lifted out and dropped over her right shoulder. Her womb, vagina, and 2/3 of her bladder cut out with one slash of a 12-inch bladed knife and carried away by the murderer. Nobody had seen a thing. You've got all these overcrowded windows looking down, straight down on the murder scene. It is daylight. Within minutes, the street outside was packed with people from the nearby fruit and vegetable market. Police were soon there. People had windows overlooking the murder scene, immediately saw a quick way of earning some easy money, and started renting out their back bedroom windows for a penny a look at the body. They were still charging a penny a look at the body, even after the body had been taken away.
We have the forms that the police filled out at the time in relation to her, and images from the Illustrated Police News. That's the backyard where the body was found. In fact, the Hughes brothers had a great eye for detail, and they really did take great care in recreating this scene for the movie, which you will see in the movie, and they were very, very true to life. It was interesting to see the great eye for detail that they had. And that's Annie Chapman as she looked in the mortuary, in the descriptive form that the police filled out. And various drawings again related to the Chapman murder from the contemporary press and various other publications. This is a shot of 29 Hanbury Street where Chapman was murdered that I took in 1967, shortly before they demolished the premises.